And then you come in here and you treat this like a joke. You come in here and look at that and say, I can't read that. You read 10 times better than half of those girls over there.
I haven't really said much, but now it's time.
June 13th, 2026, Los Angeles. What began as a retrospective documentary about early 2000s reality television suddenly hardened into a federal courtroom dispute. Tyra Banks is breaking the news, and it's bad for Netflix, EverWonder Studio, and reality check directors Loushy and Sivan. But to make any sense of this latest legal saga, we must start our story from 1973, the year Tyra Lynne Banks was born. Building a media empire. In the early 1990s, a young Tyra Banks signed with Elite Model Management, one of the most influential agencies in the fashion industry, stepping into a system that historically limited the visibility of black models at its highest tiers. Within a few years, she was breaking through those constraints, booking runway work in Paris and Milan. Soon enough, she became one of the first Black American women to achieve sustained dominance in both high fashion and commercial modeling simultaneously, appearing in campaigns and shows that had rarely featured models of her background at that level. Her rise, however, was not without friction. She publicly reflected on feeling isolated within elite fashion circles, and reports of tension with fellow supermodel Naomi Campbell circulated widely in industry media. The upper echelon of fashion modeling was as politically charged as it was glamorous. Between 1996 and 2000, Banks began to pivot away from being solely a model for hire. She moved into acting and television. This shift was subtle at first, but strategically important. She was constructing something much more durable than modeling, a media identity that could exist outside of physical runway relevance. The modeling world she had experienced firsthand was highly curated, competitive, and opaque to audiences. She identified a gap. Audiences consumed fashion, but rarely saw the machinery behind it. At the same time, reality television was beginning to reshape broadcast entertainment, with early formats proving that unscripted competition could generate massive ratings at relatively low production costs. Banks merged these observations into a single concept. What if the modeling industry itself became the subject of a televised competition? That idea became the foundation of America's Next Top Model, a series she conceptualized as both entertainment and industry exposure. It was not simply a hosting opportunity. She positioned herself as creator and executive producer, embedding herself in both the visible and invisible layers of production. The timing was precise. Networks were increasingly willing to gamble on reality formats, and youth-oriented television was searching for new hooks beyond scripted drama. Banks presented a format that combined aspirational fashion imagery with elimination-based competition. By the early 2000s, the project moved from concept to execution. The show was greenlit by UPN, a network known for targeting younger and more diverse audiences. From its inception, Banks was not a peripheral host, but the central authority figure within the format. She appeared in judging panels, delivered critiques, and framed herself as both mentor and gatekeeper. She was simultaneously the aspirational figure contestants looked up to, and the final decision-maker determining their elimination. What made this moment significant was not just the launch of a television show, but the consolidation of personal brand power into a production empire. Few models of her era transitioned into executive control of a television franchise, and even fewer did so while still maintaining mainstream cultural relevance. Behind the scenes, the mechanics of the show began to form a larger machine. Casting expanded globally. Production schedules became more intense, and challenges were designed to compress modeling experiences into episodic arcs. The birth of America's next top model and the rise of Tyra the Mentor. May 20th, 2003, Los Angeles. America's Next Top Model premiered on UPN. The format was deceptively simple, with aspiring models competing for a professional contract, but the execution was tightly engineered, blending photo shoots, runway challenges, and personality-driven eliminations into a serialized arc designed for weekly suspense. From its first cycle, the show benefited from a structural advantage that many competitors lacked at the time: access to the fashion industry's visual language, without requiring viewers to understand its complexity. Episodes compressed real modeling work into heightened, time-bound tasks. Commercial shoots in Los Angeles studios, runway walks staged in controlled environments, and critique sessions that functioned as both feedback and televised drama. Within months, ratings solidified its position as one of UPN's most successful reality properties, strong enough to justify rapid renewals and eventual syndication expansion. International licensing followed soon after, with localized versions launching across Europe, Asia, and Latin America. By Cycle 2 in 2004, the show began to establish its defining pattern: a mix of aspirational transformation and psychological pressure. Contestants were not only evaluated on modeling ability, but also on adaptability to increasingly unconventional challenges, some involving identity performance, physical discomfort, or emotionally charged narratives designed for television impact. It was within this cycle that contestant Shandi Sullivan became part of one of the show's most frequently analyzed storylines. During filming in Milan, Italy, the production shifted temporarily from domestic sets to international fashion locations, giving the series a heightened sense of authenticity. The cycle's European segment included a storyline involving Sullivan that initially aired as a personal scandal framed around relationship conflict. However, Sullivan later stated that during the same period, an inappropriate encounter had occurred while she was intoxicated. At the time of broadcast in 2004, this context was not publicly discussed in detail, and the storyline was primarily consumed by audiences as interpersonal drama rather than a deeper examination of consent or production responsibility. Meanwhile, Tyra Banks's on-screen identity solidified into something distinct from traditional competition hosts. She presented herself as a mentor figure, offering emotional guidance, career advice, and personal reflection moments that framed the competition as transformative rather than purely eliminative. This Tyra the Mentor persona became one of the central emotional anchors of the series. In judging panels filmed in Los Angeles soundstages, she shifted between stern evaluator and motivational coach, often delivering long-form feedback segments that blended technical critique with personal storytelling about her own modeling experiences. Behind the camera, the production expanded in scale and ambition. Photo shoots became more elaborate, frequently designed around conceptual themes rather than standard fashion assignments. Contestants were placed in stylized environments such as floating runway sets, extreme weather simulations, and theatrical sets. These sequences were tightly edited to emphasize transformation arcs, where contestants were repeatedly reframed from uncertain beginners into competitive professionals. By Cycle 3 and Cycle 4, the show's ratings growth began to stabilize its position as a flagship reality series of the early 2000s. It became one of the defining programs of its network era, consistently drawing strong viewership among younger demographics and generating international syndication revenue. Its influence extended beyond television into fashion marketing, with agencies and brands beginning to recognize the show as a feeder system for visibility, if not always for long-term modeling careers. By 2006, ANTM was a fully established franchise with a recognizable format, global adaptations, and a clearly defined public identity. Tyra Banks, now inseparable from the show's brand, occupied a rare position in television, a host who was also the conceptual architect and public moral center of the series. The early cycles had done more than produce winners. They had created a cultural shorthand for televised transformation, competition, and critique. But this success, as we saw in the case of Shandy Sullivan, had a dark side. Fame, ratings, and growing criticism. As the show's visibility grew, so did criticism from media writers, former contestants, and industry observers who began to question the ethics of its production style. Early criticism focused on makeover episodes, which were designed to transform contestants' looks for modeling viability. One of the most frequently cited examples involved Cycle 6 winner Danny Evans, who was repeatedly urged on camera to close the gap between her front teeth. What had been framed in the episode as professional advice became, in later retrospectives, a symbol of how narrowly the show defined beauty standards and how publicly it applied pressure to alter contestants' appearance. Behind the polished runway sequences and photo shoots, contestants from multiple cycles later described an environment shaped by constant evaluation and limited privacy. They spoke about long filming days, restricted communication with the outside world, and a production structure that amplified emotional reactions for episodic storytelling. What had aired as spontaneous conflict or breakdowns was later described by participants as the result of tightly controlled production conditions. Stress was not incidental, but structurally embedded in the format. The show's creative direction also increasingly leaned into conceptual photo shoots and identity-driven themes. These included race, gender expression, and cultural archetypes, which were presented as artistic exercises, but later drew criticism for reinforcing stereotypes. Some shoots, particularly those involving racial or cultural costuming, were revisited in later years as examples of early 2000s reality television's willingness to prioritize shock value over sensitivity. At the time of airing, however, these segments were often defended by producers as industry satire or creative experimentation within fashion photography traditions. A major structural shift in the show's legacy occurred during the All-Star Cycle era, when former contestants returned for a second competitive run. In 2012, one of the most controversial incidents in the franchise's history unfolded. Angelia Preston, who had originally been positioned as the winner of the All-Star season, was disqualified after filming had already been completed. The finale was reshot, and a different winner was ultimately crowned. The reasons for Preston's disqualification were never fully disclosed publicly at the time. But in 2014, Preston escalated the matter legally by filing a lawsuit related to her disqualification and treatment during production. The case was settled confidentially, marking one of the first moments where ANTM's internal production decisions entered a formal legal dispute. This became a turning point. Around the same period, the internet began reshaping how ANTM was remembered. Clips from earlier cycles resurfaced on YouTube, Tumblr, and later TikTok and X, formerly Twitter, often stripped of their original episode context and recirculated as standalone moments. These clips included judging panel critiques, emotional eliminations, and controversial photo shoots, which were reframed for a new audience. As this digital rediscovery accelerated, the tone of the discussion shifted sharply. Critics and online commentators increasingly described ANTM through themes of body shaming, mental health insensitivity, racially charged imagery, and what they characterized as humiliation-based entertainment. The show's most dramatic moments, once marketed as compelling reality storytelling, were reinterpreted as evidence of systemic production choices that prioritized conflict and shock over contestant well-being. By 2020, Tyra Banks publicly acknowledged that some past episodes contained insensitive choices, a notable moment of partial reflection on the show's legacy. This acknowledgement did not resolve criticism, but it formalized a shift in how the franchise was discussed publicly. Former contestants, who had previously been more constrained in their commentary during the show's active years, increasingly began speaking openly about their experiences in interviews, podcasts, and social media platforms. At the same time, media outlets began producing retrospective investigations that reevaluated ANTMs as a product of early 2000s reality television culture. These analyses placed the show alongside other contemporaneous formats that had relied heavily on emotional pressure, rapid editing, and competitive isolation as narrative devices. And then came 2025. The documentary that reignited everything. America's Next Top Model was long dead. It was seen as the kind of television experiment routinely re-examined through documentaries rather than reruns. That shift began when Netflix commissioned a 3-part docuseries titled Reality Check: Inside America's Next Top Model, produced under EverWonder Studio and directed by Loushy and Sivan. The project was supposed to be a reconstruction of how a global modeling competition had shaped, and sometimes strained, the people inside it. Production drew on a wide net of sources, including former contestants across multiple cycles, production staff, and media critics who had followed the show during its peak years. Tyra Banks agreed to participate and sat for approximately 3.5 hours of filmed interviews. That single interview became one of the documentary's most scrutinized elements. The series moved between archival ANTM footage from the early 2000s and newly recorded testimony. One of its central threads revisited production practices, how editing decisions had shaped contestant arcs, how photo shoot concepts were developed, and how emotional responses were captured and framed for episodic storytelling. Former contestants described a system where hours of filming were condensed into minutes of broadcast, with narrative coherence often prioritized over context. Editors, according to accounts included in the series, functioned as both storytellers and gatekeepers of perception, assembling conflict, triumph, and elimination into tightly controlled arcs. Another focus of the documentary was power distribution within the ANTM ecosystem. While Tyra Banks remained the most visible figure, the series emphasized that the production environment included multiple layers of decision-making. Producers, directors, network executives, and creative teams all contributed to how challenges were designed and how footage was ultimately presented. Still, the documentary consistently returned to Banks as the symbolic center of authority. The most sensitive segment of the series centered on Cycle 2 contestant Shandi Sullivan and the 2003 Italy storyline filmed in Milan. In the original broadcast era, the narrative had been framed primarily as relationship drama involving Sullivan and her boyfriend during the show's European trip. However, Reality Check revisited the incident through contemporary discussions of consent and intoxication. Sullivan's account, as presented in the documentary, described an inappropriate encounter during filming that she later interpreted as non-consensual due to intoxication at the time. The documentary reframed the information within modern legal and cultural frameworks that distinguished between reality TV editing narratives and consent-based interpretations of events. This reframing became one of the most contested aspects of the series. Critics and commentators noted that the same footage and events had existed for decades, but the interpretive lens had changed. What had once been consumed as a reality television scandal was now being re-examined as a serious incident requiring ethical and legal context. The documentary used this shift to explore how reality television in the early 2000s had often operated without the vocabulary or safeguards that later became standard in entertainment production. Structurally, the series leaned heavily on juxtaposition. Celebratory ANTM runway sequences were placed alongside testimonials describing emotional strain, long filming hours, and the pressure of being edited into simplified character roles. Former contestants described feeling both elevated and reduced by the same process. They were given national visibility while simultaneously being shaped into narrative archetypes that did not always reflect their lived experience. The reception was immediate and polarized. Viewers who had grown up watching ANTM during its original run saw the series as a reframing of something they had previously consumed as entertainment. Younger audiences encountering it for the first time often interpreted it as an indictment of early reality television ethics. At the center of the debate was Tyra Banks herself, and she wasn't all too happy about all of this. Tyra Banks fights back. June 13, 2026, Los Angeles. In the federal court system of California's Central District, Tyra Banks formally escalated what had already become a years-long cultural dispute into a legal confrontation. The filing has landed against 4 defendants: Netflix, EverWonder Studio, and documentary directors Loushy and Sivan. The complaint argues that Reality Check, Inside America's Next Top Model, was presented to audiences as a factual documentary, but, according to Banks, it relies on selective editing and omission practices that have distorted her on-camera testimony. A key assertion in the filing is that portions of her interview, totaling several hours of recorded material, with only a fraction appearing in the final cut, were removed in ways that have altered the interpretive context of her responses. The lawsuit has positioned this editing process not as standard documentary compression, but as narrative construction that has allegedly changed meaning. At the center of the case is a specific sequence involving Shandy Sullivan and events tied to the 2003 Italy filming location in Milan. Banks's lawsuit has not disputed that Sullivan made the statements attributed to her. Instead, it has challenged how the documentary has connected those statements to Banks's own conduct and knowledge at the time of production. According to the filing, the alleged defamation stemmed from what Banks has described as the implication that she knowingly ignored or failed to appropriately address an assault allegation during filming. Her legal argument asserts that the documentary constructed this implication through editing structure, creating what she has called a false and defamatory narrative. In the complaint, Banks has characterized this portrayal as a complete fabrication. The lawsuit also emphasizes procedural concerns about production transparency. Banks has claimed she was not given adequate context regarding how her interview material would be used, nor sufficient opportunity to respond to certain allegations raised by other participants featured in the series. The filing has framed this as a breakdown in documentary ethics. Banks is now seeking monetary damages, a jury trial, and injunctive relief that would restrict further use of her likeness in connection with the documentary's associated promotional materials and related content. The defendants, including Netflix and EverWonder Studio, have been positioned in the filing as responsible parties for both production oversight and editorial control. Directors Loushy and Sivan have been named in relation to the construction of the documentary's narrative structure. Regardless of what happens next, the case has reactivated a broader cultural timeline stretching back more than 2 decades. America's Next Top Model, which premiered in 2003, was once widely regarded as a defining reality television format of its era. combining fashion industry access with competitive elimination storytelling. Over time, however, its legacy has become increasingly contested, particularly as former contestants and media analysts revisit production practices through changing cultural standards around consent, representation, and psychological pressure in entertainment environments. By 2026, that legacy has become the subject of competing narratives, one viewing ANTM as a pioneering media experiment that opened doors for aspiring models, and another viewing it as an early example of reality television's ethical blind spots. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.